They told me my bonus was gone just like that. Policy change, my CEO said, while his champagne glass was still half full from the party. 3 years of late nights, every payroll system running because of me, and he laughed as if I were disposable. What he didn't see was the signature he gave me months earlier, buried in a contract no one else bothered to read. It meant one simple thing: no pay for me, no pay for anyone. By the time the first paycheck bounced, I already knew I had them trapped. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from? Hit that like and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this unfolds. The CEO's birthday was supposed to be a celebration of success, a night where executives clinked glasses and interns snapped photos for social media. For me, it became the stage for erasure. Charles Benton, the man whose name gleamed in bronze outside the Chicago headquarters, raised his glass and announced new company milestones: revenue up, investors happy, a bright future ahead. The crowd cheered, and then he made the joke that cut deeper than any firing could. He gestured toward the giant screen where a slideshow of our core leadership flashed. Faces I knew, faces I had trained, faces who relied on the payroll system I built to get their checks on time. My face, though, was gone, erased. 3 years of 70-hour weeks distilled to a joke. Guess Anna didn't make the cut. Laughter rippled across the room. Even Karen from HR chuckled, as if deleting me from history was just office humor. I stood there, glass in hand, feeling heat climb my throat, but I didn't raise my voice. I didn't storm out. I simply swallowed the champagne, smiled politely, and remembered the clause buried in the system I wrote months ago. Rule 27, one line hidden in a manual no executive had ever read, a rule that made one thing clear: no authorized compensation to me, no compensation to anyone. It wasn't sabotage, it was policy. Their policy, approved by Charles himself, signed in a meeting he barely stayed awake for. They thought I was a detail, a line item, a replaceable technician. They never saw the strings I wove through every paycheck, every bonus, every executive stock grant that fueled their empire. That night, Charles announced another humiliation. He declared that bonuses for non-essential staff were canceled due to budget restructuring. He looked straight at me when he said it, smirking, as if to test how much I would endure. Around me, people whispered, some embarrassed for me, others entertained by the show. What they didn't realize was that my silence wasn't weakness. It was the sound of a trap waiting to snap shut. By the time the applause faded and Charles left with his entourage, I already knew what was coming. Payroll was scheduled for Friday. On Thursday night, the system would process approvals, and when it did, the company would discover that erasing me wasn't a harmless joke. It was the beginning of their collapse. Because humiliation may sting in the moment, but revenge, when planned correctly, suffocates slowly. And I had been planning longer than they ever imagined. People thought my job was numbers, formulas, and spreadsheets. They didn't realize payroll wasn't just math, it was trust. And I was the only one in the building who understood how fragile that trust really was. When Charles promoted his drinking buddy to CFO last year and half the accounting team quit in protest, I was the one left to rebuild the entire payroll automation from the ground up. Long nights in a fluorescent-lit office, rewriting outdated scripts line by line. I didn't just fix their problems, I designed a system that no one else could even navigate without me. But I also knew the company too well. I knew how Charles dismissed anyone he thought was beneath him, how bonuses vanished without explanation, how recognition was handed out like party favors to people who had never earned it. So when I wrote the system, I slipped in what I called Rule 27B. On paper, it looked like a simple compliance safeguard. All compensation must be validated through the designated technical lead. In practice, it meant one thing. If I wasn't compensated, if I wasn't recognized, the system automatically flagged every outgoing payment as invalid. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't even hidden. It was documented in a 200-page manual that nobody bothered to read. Charles himself had initialed the approval packet with a pen that probably cost more than my monthly rent. They gave me authority without even realizing it. I never thought I'd use it. At least not until that night when my name disappeared from the leadership slideshow and my bonus was wiped away with a smirk. That's when the decision hardened. I wasn't going to send angry emails. I wasn't going to beg HR for fairness. I was going to let their own signatures strangle them. Because payroll wasn't just about paychecks, it was about credibility. Miss one cycle, and employees panic. Miss two, and investors notice. By the third, the entire structure starts to crack. They didn't understand that I had built the foundation they were standing on, and Rule 27B was the fuse I had wired into it. The humiliation at that party wasn't just cruel, it was permission. Permission for me to remind them that without me, nothing moved, nothing flowed, and nothing survived. The wire was in place. All I had to do was wait. Friday started with a single voicemail from HR. Karen's voice clipped and uneasy. Anna, payroll didn't finalize last night. Can you confirm? I let the message sit while I stirred my coffee. By 10, the whispers spread like smoke. Employees refreshing their bank apps. Department heads fielding angry calls from staff whose rent money hadn't arrived. At noon, an email blast from finance tried to calm the storm. Minor technical delay, expect resolution within hours. But by 3 o'clock, the CFO's own quarterly bonus failed, the system rejecting it with the same blunt warning. Invalid compensation, validation required. His face turned gray in the break room as the news spread faster than the coffee orders. Executives tried to swipe company cards for late lunches, only to watch transactions decline in front of junior staff. Panic moved floor to floor. By 5, Charles himself stomped into IT demanding answers. Engineers stumbled over jargon until finally one muttered what everyone already knew. Only Anna holds override authority. Charles glared at me across the open office, but I didn't flinch. I simply packed my bag, logged off, and walked past him without a word. Behind me, the building buzzed with rising fear. Outside, Chicago's streets carried on as if nothing had shifted. But inside that tower, cracks had opened in the foundation, cracks that no patch could cover. They thought it was a glitch. I knew it was the beginning. By Monday morning, the entire building pulsed with dread. Departments that normally hummed with routine were frozen in limbo. Employees crowding around HR like passengers stranded at a gate. Executives were summoned to the glass-walled conference room on the top floor, blinds drawn for the first time anyone could remember. I wasn't invited, but through whispers and texts from sympathetic colleagues, I pieced together exactly what happened inside. The CFO, pale and sweating, started with the obvious. Payroll hasn't cleared. Not just salaries, bonuses, vendor payments, everything. Charles waved him off like it was an IT hiccup. Reset the system, rerun the job. That was when Rebecca from legal closed her binder with a sound that sliced through the room. "It's not that simple," she said. She slid a printed page across the polished table. Page 143 of the payroll manual, Rule 27B. The clause I had planted months ago, signed by Charles himself. Rebecca's voice was measured, clinical. Compensation can't be released if the designated technical lead is not validated. That lead is Anna Carter. Silence thickened. The head of HR tried to soften it. But Anna is still employed. She's on active status. Rebecca didn't blink. Being employed isn't the question. Was she paid? Was her compensation approved? The CFO swallowed hard. Her Q2 bonus was withheld. Finance flagged it as non-essential expenditure. Charles tried to laugh it off. That's just boilerplate. No one enforces that junk. Rebecca didn't laugh. It's enforceable, and the vendor already confirmed it this morning. Our system is locked because the company itself is in breach of contract. The room erupted. Department heads demanded answers. HR sputtered about policy changes. Finance insisted they couldn't have known. Every excuse circled back to the same truth. Charles had signed off on the very clause now strangling his empire. When he tried to reassert control, slamming his fist on the table, it only made the panic worse. One VP muttered that employees were already calling labor attorneys. Another whispered that investors had noticed missed payments in the SEC filings. Charles turned red, pointing at the door. "Then drag her in here and make her fix it!" Rebecca's reply was quiet but final. "You don't order her anymore. You need her." For the first time in his career, Charles Benton sat silent in his own conference room, stripped of the illusion of power. His empire, his board, his entire image as the untouchable CEO, now hinged on the one person he thought was safe to humiliate. Outside the blinds, I walked past the room with my coffee, catching a glimpse of faces pressed into despair, executives arguing in muted pantomime. They thought I was invisible, a ghost in the system. What they didn't understand was that invisibility had always been my greatest weapon. In that room, the balance had shifted. They weren't discussing the company's future. They were discussing how to beg me for it. That night, my phone lit up with a number I knew by heart but had never seen without a secretary filtering it first. Charles Benton was calling me directly. No assistant, no legal counsel, just his voice low and raw in the quiet of my apartment. "Anna," he said, not even trying to sound calm, "we need to resolve this." I let the silence drag long enough for him to taste it. "I'm listening," I said. His tone slipped between anger and desperation. "You've made your point, but this is bigger than you. Hundreds of employees are waiting on paychecks. You don't want their families to suffer." The irony almost made me laugh. This was the same man who toasted to my erasure days earlier, who smirked while announcing my bonus was canceled in front of the entire company. Now he was invoking families and fairness, begging the one person he thought disposable. I kept my voice even. "What exactly are you offering?" Papers rustled on his end, the sound of someone fumbling for ground that no longer existed. "Back pay, your full bonus, a seat at the table to talk about the system going forward." I already had my list prepared, typed, dated, signed by my own attorney. "Here's what it will take," I said, reading each item slowly so he couldn't mistake my intent. 1. Immediate reinstatement of my bonus plus a 40% penalty. 2. A written apology delivered at the next all-hands meeting, acknowledging my role in building this company's payroll integrity. 3. A 7-figure buyout of Rule 27B wired to my account within 24 hours. He sucked in air like I had struck him. 7 figures? You're holding the company hostage. My voice never rose. I'm not holding you hostage. I'm enforcing the contract you signed. If you want the lock removed, you meet the terms. Otherwise, payroll stays dark. Investors keep asking questions, and the company bleeds out one check at a time. For a long moment, all I heard was his breathing, shallow and uneven. Then a whisper. "We should have just paid you the damn bonus." "Yes," I said, cold and simple. "You should have." I ended the call before he could respond, set my phone down, and poured a glass of wine. Outside my window, the city pulsed with light, oblivious to the fact that one man's empire was hanging by the thread I had woven. He thought he was bargaining with me. What he didn't realize was that this was never a negotiation. It was a countdown. By Tuesday morning, the transfer hit my account, the bonus restored with penalties stacked neatly beside it. A second email followed, this time stamped with the board's approval. Attached was the apology. Formal, stiff, but mine to review. I didn't edit a word. I simply replied, "Read it exactly." That afternoon, Charles faced the entire company. His voice strained as he admitted I had built the very system that kept their paychecks alive. The words tasted bitter to him, but to the staff it was a revelation. Some clapped, others stared in disbelief, watching a man who had never bent forced to bow. Payroll resumed by evening. Deposits cleared, executives exhaled, and HR told employees to focus on moving forward. For them, it felt like resolution, like order had been restored. For Charles, it must have felt like survival, as if money and an apology could patch over what had already cracked. I watched the broadcast alone, the city lights flickering behind me, and knew they believed it was finished. But the buyout wasn't my finale. It was the lull before the next strike. Because while Charles thought he had bought back control, I had already built something he could never pay off. Charles thought wiring me 7 figures bought peace, but what he never understood was that I'd been planning beyond him for months. Rule 27B was just a lock I could open or close at will. The real weapon was the second system, the one I quietly built after nights of being left off recognition emails and after years of watching executives steal credit. I called it version 2, not flashy, just precise. It wasn't designed for Benton Financial, it was designed for what would come after. When vendors realized their payments had been delayed for weeks, a few of them reached out to me directly. Not about Benton, not even about payroll, just about trust. "Anna, are you consulting?" One message read. Another was blunter. "If you ever left that place, we'd follow you." I didn't advertise, didn't solicit. I simply listened. Then one night over drinks, a venture capitalist asked the question that turned possibility into inevitability. If you built their payroll from scratch, why not build one for everyone else? So I did. Version 2 was portable, adaptable, and tested in the shadows. I installed it quietly for 3 pilot companies, all startups desperate for reliable compliance and accurate payouts. They loved it. More importantly, they loved me, someone who answered late-night calls and actually knew where the numbers came from. By the time Charles wired the money, I already had contracts drafted, signatures pending. The ink was drying on a deal that shifted not just employees, but investors. See, payroll isn't just about paying people, it's about confidence. When Benton Financial missed a single cycle, investors started sniffing elsewhere. I didn't push them. I didn't have to. I just had version 2 ready when they asked where else their money might be safe. On Wednesday morning, while Charles strutted into the building pretending the storm had passed, I was across town in a co-working space filled with new faces, developers, finance leads, operations staff, all former Benton employees who decided they'd rather bet on me than sink with him. They signed contracts one after another, plugging into a system that worked on day one. Investors who had once toasted Benton's empire now shifted their portfolios quietly, funneling cash into the startup that wore no nameplate on the door but ran on my code. By Friday, whispers in the industry turned into headlines. Key clients exploring alternatives. New player emerging in Chicago payroll market. Charles called me again. His voice cracked, but this time I didn't pick up. There was nothing left to negotiate. The company was hollow, its lifeblood redirected before it knew it was bleeding out. Revenge isn't always about burning the house down. Sometimes it's about building a better one across the street and watching everyone move in. Charles thought humiliation was the joke. He thought money was the fix. He never realized the future had already shifted under his feet, and I was the one who wrote the rules. 2 weeks later, Benton Financial was a shell, its offices half empty, its executives whispering in corners about severance and lawsuits. Charles avoided the lobby, slipping through side doors like a man hiding from his own reflection. Investors had walked. Employees had resigned, and clients were quietly migrating to the system they once believed belonged to him. They didn't realize it belonged to me all along. In the co-working space downtown, sunlight spilled through tall windows onto desks filled with people who'd once sat in Benton's cubicles. They weren't nervous anymore. They were building something new, something cleaner, something that didn't rely on a single man's ego. And I was at the center, not erased, not mocked, but trusted. The irony was sharp. Charles had tried to turn me invisible, and by doing so, he made me unforgettable. He thought humiliation would bury me. Instead, it buried him. I didn't scream, didn't sabotage, didn't throw matches into his empire. I redirected its foundation into my own hands. That's the truth about revenge. It isn't about fire and smoke. It's about making sure the people who tried to erase you learn they were standing on ground you quietly claimed long before they noticed. There's a moment in every betrayal when the room feels smaller, the laughter sharper, and the air heavier, when you realize they don't just underestimate you, they've erased you. That moment burns, but if you hold still and wait, it becomes the spark that lights the fuse of your revenge. What I learned from this story is simple but powerful. You don't always need to fight with noise, anger, or destruction. Sometimes, the smartest move is to redirect the energy others tried to use against you. I was humiliated in public, stripped of credit, denied my bonus as if I were disposable. Instead of screaming, I remembered the foundation I had built, the payroll system they depended on. That quiet leverage became my sharpest weapon. And here's the lesson. In work, in relationships, in life, never give away all of your power. Protect what you create, document your value, and keep a piece of yourself untouchable. When people show arrogance, let them walk into their own trap. Revenge doesn't need to destroy everything. It just needs to make those who hurt you face the consequences of their choices. For me, it wasn't about burning Benton Financial to the ground. It was about proving that trust, competence, and foresight matter more than ego. That's a lesson every American worker can understand, because all of us know what it feels like to be overlooked, undervalued, or dismissed. How to get started today. Keep records of your work, emails, notes, systems. Build relationships that exist outside titles or offices. Learn one skill that makes you indispensable. Your silence can be power if you know when to use it. What about you? Have you ever been erased or underestimated at work? Drop your story in the comments, share this video if it resonates, and subscribe for more stories of revenge, justice, and resilience.